In this video, we're going to be talking about the distance formula. So the distance formula is the distance between 2 points. So if I label them x1, y1, x2, y2, the distance is given by the square root of the difference in the x values squared plus the difference in the y values squared. And this formula actually comes from the Pythagorean theorem. So if I want to know the distance between 2 points, I can actually draw a right triangle around those points, and the distance on the x-axis, so how far left and right, so from this point to that point, that's the difference in the x's. So that's where we get this x2 minus x1, and that gives us side A. Then the difference in the y values would be how far apart the y values are, or the y points are. So from the lowest point to the highest point, we want to know the difference in those. And that gives us a b value. The distance that we were trying to find would be the hypotenuse, because that's the side length across from that 90-degree angle. It's the longest side length. That's our hypotenuse. So if we took that equation, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and actually I'm going to put the c squared first since that's our distance we're trying to find, and we square root both sides, we'll see that c equals the square root of a, which we said a was the difference in the x values. So how far apart are those x values, plus b squared, which we said b was how far apart the y values were, so the difference in the y values, squared. Right, so this is a squared, b squared, and we square root it all to find c. So that's where the distance formula comes from. And now we're going to use that formula, which this is something that you will have to memorize for a quiz or a test or the final. And we're going to be able to find the distance between any 2 points. So the first thing I do is, like this example here on the left, it says find the distance between -1, 3 and -2, 6. I'm going to label this as x1, y1, and the second point as x2, y2. It does not matter which one you label as the first point or the second point, as long as your x1, y1 stays together and your x2, y2 stays together. And then I'm going to fill it into my formula. So d equals the square root. x2 was -2 minus x1, which is -1. That quantity squared, so the difference in the x value squared, plus y2, which is 6, minus y1, which is 3, that quantity squared. We have to simplify those parentheses before we can square anything. So a -2 minus a -1. When we subtract a negative, we're really adding, right? So -2 plus 1 would be -1, and 6 minus 3 would be 3. Now we can square those. -1 times -1 is a +1. 3 times 3 is 9. And we add them together. We get the square root of 10. And then from there, you should try to simplify that radical if you could. You cannot simplify 10, but it does ask us to find the nearest thousandths place. So I take 10, take the square root of it, and go to the thousandths. So tenths, hundred thousandths, that's the 2. Look to the right, that's another 2. So that says leave this one alone. We get 3.162. So approximately 3.162. Remember, tenths, hundred thousandths. Alright, go ahead and try the example on the right. I would start by labeling what these points are. So these are the end points here. I know I drew some things in that picture, but those are the end points. find out what those points are, and then find the distance. Okay, so we have this graph of a line segment. We want to know the distance. The first point on the line segment is at -2, -1. -2, -1. The second point, or the end point of that line segment, is at +1, 3. So first we have to know what the points are before we can find the distance between them. Now I'm going to plug it into my equation. Distance equals the square root of the difference in the x values. So doesn't matter which one I pick as point 1. I'm going to say this one is x1, y1. The other is x2, y2. So x2 is 1 minus x1, which is a -2. That whole thing gets squared, because that's one of the legs squared, plus the difference in the y values. So y2 is 3 minus y1 is a -1. That whole quantity gets squared. We simplify. We have to work inside out. You cannot take the square root across sums and differences like this, so you have to actually simplify those parentheses. 1 minus a -2. When I subtract a negative, it becomes plus. So 1 plus 2 is 3. Same thing, 3 minus a -1 becomes plus. Now I have 3 plus 1, which is 4. Then I square. 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16. Add them together. 9 plus 16 is going to be a positive 25. And the square root of 25 is 5. So no need to round that because it is a whole number. So that distance is 5 units. Even whole number.